Hello and welcome back to Shine the Fine Arts. Today we are going to work with watercolors and learn to paint lovebirds with watercolors. So let's begin.
I'm starting off with the background. To do so, I am first wetting the entire background just with water and then slowly starting off to drop colors on the background. You have to be a little bit careful when you are actually wetting the surface around the subject so that only the background is getting wet. Otherwise, when you start dropping the color, it will get inside your subject's subject matter or the body of the birds in this case. And in case of watercolor, once the color gets onto the surface of the paper, it sometimes can be very hard to get it off. So be a little bit careful. If necessary, use masking fluid to guard the borders. In this case, I did not feel it was necessary, so I did not use any. Another tip for doing the backgrounds is that you know what colors you're going to put in general in the body of the subject, in this case, the birds. Uh, Once you know that, arrange the colors in the backgrounds accordingly so that your subject color gets a pop. What I'm trying to say here is that try to adjust the contrast to the best of your ability. Now I'm starting off with my first bird and starting off with the head area where I have the brightest yellows. Once I progress more into the painting, you will see that I have been able to get more bright colors in the second bird than I have gotten in the first bird. And what major difference I noticed in both the birds is that to get very bright, vibrant colors, you need to use less of water and more of paint. But you also have to make sure that your paint flows nicely. So wet the entire surface first with water and then get very big amounts of paint and without diluting it much, and that is the best way to get very vibrant colors if you're looking for vibrant colors, which I was in this particular scenario. Lovebirds are or especially these this particular reference that I'm working from had very bright colors, and my intention was to capture those bright colors and keep it as bright as possible. You can see that when I'm starting to put colors, I am starting off with a very light shade of yellow, and then I am slowly pulling in more of the brighter shades. The reason I'm doing so is that some of the areas, the edges and certain areas, because of how light is reflecting off the surfaces, are much lighter than the rest of the areas. And in watercolors, it is much easier to go from light to dark than to go from dark and come back to light. So I'm starting off with the lightest areas and in general blocking the entire area with the light colors and then slowly building layers. Once again, for watercolors, when you're building layers, you have to just drop the colors on top and try as to put as little brush pressure. Do not scrub at all because that will lift off the bottom layers. Nothing is permanent in watercolor. As soon as you put water, your paints, no matter how well set and dried they were, they can get reactivated. So keep that in mind. When you're putting layers on top of layers in watercolors, do not scrub very hard. Just drop the colors in the right areas. And always try to work in smaller areas and drop colors in those areas and adjust them first, and do not try to go over a very big area because then one side gets dried and the other side stays wet and you do not get the right balance of colors or brightness. In the entire body of both the birds, you will see that and that is a general rule with watercolors, that I'm starting off with the lightest shades in the little areas and then I'm moving on to the darker shades. And like I mentioned just a little bit ago, I am choosing very small segments of feathers. So I'm almost most of the time I'm working one feather at a time, at the most two or three feathers at a time, not more than that. And some of the feathers that looked bright green at the first glance, when I started working on them, I saw that I had to pull in some amount of blues and purples to actually get the greens look green. And to the shadow areas of those green feathers actually were much bluer and had more purple and blue than it had green. So that is one important thing about painting in realism in general, is that the colors not necessarily are what they appear. Some things that appear white may not be white. They might be different shades of blue or gray. Similarly here, like I said, all greens were not just greens. They were even purples and blues. Now you can see that I am slowly and gradually, while I am finishing off the first bird, also moving on to the next bird and trying to maintain continuity, because both the birds have to kind of balance each other. So it was important that I started on the finished off the first and then slowly moved on to the first, and not treat them as two completely different subjects. You could do that too, but I wanted to keep the brightness of either birds very close to each other, if not completely the same. And in the end, I have been able to do that. Now onto the second bird. The head first, of course, just like the first one. Putting in the lightest yellows first, then orange, then the scarlet red, and finally the crimson red. And for the very, very dark areas, I've just added a touch of blue with the red to get the darkest darks. Onto the yellow part of the feathers. There I have started with the lightest shade of lemon yellow, diluting it with a lot of water, and then moving over to yellow ochre, darker shades of yellow, orange, and some red. Moving on to the bottom feathers, which are gradually moving from yellow to more green. And you can see that once I'm building the feathers, I am adding more and more colors into it and getting them darker layer by layer. And I found, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the painting, that adding layers on top of layers was actually getting me much brighter colors. And I'm working with Holbein watercolors in this painting, and I generally favor it with on top of all other brands of watercolor I've used so far. They give me the brightness that is unmatched, unparalleled so far by any other brands. Also, I'm working on a hot press watercolor paper, which has a much smoother surface. In this particular bird, I did not want a textured surface. I wanted a very smooth surface, and hot press papers gives you that. Onto the blue areas of the bird, you can see that in some of the areas I am also lifting off some paint while the paint is still wet and just not adding more paint. And with that, we come to the end of the painting. Thank you for watching. Leave your comments and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.